I am Ginny and I am filming this video so you all can learn about the momentum frame and how to load your quilt onto the frame. The first thing I'm going to do is I have a little bit of a disclaimer that I'm going to make, and that is I load the quilt frame different than what they show in the momentum video. I do things my own way, not necessarily the Babylock way, so don't yell at Babylock if I do things different, okay? Don't go to your dealer, this is for the people who own the machines, and yell at them if I do things different. So that's my first disclaimer. Second of all, these videos are made primarily for our renters here at the store, not necessarily for people who own the machines, although this will work for both of you, the renters and the owners. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for a minute about why the momentum frame and what the momentum frame does for us as quilters. So I'm going to talk about the machine itself, and on a standard quilting machine and on our Babylock, we have an 18-inch throat, and an 18-inch throat is from the needle to the end of the throat of the machine. Okay, it's an 18-inch measurement. On a typical quilt frame, what happens is as soon as you put your quilt and your take-up bar through the throat of the machine, you automatically lose a couple of inches of quilting space. And as your quilt gets bigger and bigger on the take-up rail, the larger the quilt, the more throat space you lose as you move. Hold on. Turn this off. There we go. The more space you lose as you move the quilt front and back. You can see that my machine is actually starting to hit the quilt. Same thing when I come forward on the front stroke, my quilt is actually hitting, or my machine is actually hitting the quilt. So as the quilt gets larger on the take-up rail, you start losing inches. You start off with 18 inches, you lose 2 inches as soon as you put the take-up rail through the throat, and then as you're quilting, you start losing and losing and losing. And on a large quilt like I've got on the frame right now, you can get down to as little as 13 inches of quilting space. So in the quilting space is your actually usable space front to back. Okay, so Babylock came out with the momentum frame to kind of help alleviate that space problem. And what happens is, I'm going to turn the frame on. Okay, and the first thing you have to do once you turn the frame on, they call it calibrating, and you simply roll the frame front and back about 3 times. And you can see the take-up rail actually is sliding out of my way. So what that does for me is it allows me to use the entire throat space on my machine. I can go all the way up to my take-up rail or my idler bar, and then as I move the machine forward, my quilt actually rolls out of my way to give me my full throat space. Okay, so I get a lot of questions. Why does that matter? Why that moving rail? That's the easiest explanation, is it allows you more space to quilt in throughout the entire body of the quilt. You don't lose any space from the top of the quilt to the bottom of the quilt. And that's a huge thing. So if I can quilt into 15 to 16 inches of space throughout, fabulous. All right, so this portion of the video, now that I'm done showing you my frame and what I had on there, this portion of the video, I am going to talk about the different parts of the frame. On our frame here at the shop, I actually have written on our frame. This portion is really for our renters, because if you own a momentum, I haven't written on your frame. It's okay to do this. So we're going to start with number 1. Okay, number 1 on our frame is our quilt top rail. Okay, this is the rail that your quilt top attaches to. Number 1, and by the way, when the ratchets are engaged, the rail moves freely both directions. I'm sorry, when they're disengaged, it moves freely in both directions. When the ratchets are engaged, the quilt will only move one direction. Okay, and that's what that arrow represents. So, quilt top rail, ratchets engaged, rolls towards the frame. So that's rail number 1. Rail number 2 is our backing rail. Your quilt back attaches to this rail. Okay, the arrow designates the direction that the quilt will roll when the ratchets are engaged. To disengage the ratchets, the arrows are in line with the rail. No ratcheting. To engage the ratchets, do a half turn so that the arrows are in line with the arm. Now the quilt will only roll one direction. So that is our quilt back rail. Our next rail, number 3, is our take-up rail. Now, the take-up rail on the momentum frame is the one that is so very different from any other frame out there. This is the rail that moves back and forth. Because of the back and forth moving, sliding motion, this ratchet does not fully engage. Okay, so this one never locks tight like the other ratchets do. So take-up rail is number 3, and when you're advancing the quilt, you turn this rail towards the front of the machine. So follow this arrow, it goes towards the front. The most important rail on this frame is number 4. It is our idler bar or our dead bar. Now, a lot of quilt frames, this bar doesn't do anything. All it does is hold your leader tight. Because our take-up rail doesn't tension though, this actually becomes our tensioner bar. So this is a hugely important bar, and it's really important to get all the motions right with it. So what I'm going to do, instead of going through and just kind of showing you everything, I'm actually going to load a quilt onto the frame. Before I do that, I want to show you 2 more things about this idler bar. First is our rail pin. And the rail pin, we're going to slide the camera right on top. There is a pin right where my fingertip is, and that pin actually fits inside this plastic piece. There's a hole in there. To disengage this rail pin, you're going to grab the handle, pull, and you're going to roll the idler bar around a half a turn so that the hinge pin is on top. Disengage the hinge pin by pulling, and this bar will open up. Okay, so that's what makes this rail so different, is it cracks open. So what we're going to do first when we load our quilt is I'm actually going to close the hinge pin, and I'm going to engage the bar. I don't want it to move for the loading of the quilt. Now, I load my quilt very different than what they show in any of the videos. I actually load my entire quilt onto the backing rail first. I'm sorry, the take-up rail, and then I wind it back onto my backing rail. I find I get a really fast and a really smooth and even load. And since I quilt professionally, I am all about speed. The more time I spend quilting, the better. And so this is my kind of shortcut way to load a quilt. So we're going to go do that real quick. The first thing I do, and we do use a zipper system here at the store, so if you're not using a zippered system, this is going to be a little bit difficult for you. So I'm going to zip my quilt onto the frame with my leader for my take-up rail coming underneath the idler bar. The quilt is not going to stay on here like this. I will be taking the quilt off once I have it loaded onto my backing rail. Okay, so all I'm going to do once I have that zipped on is I'm going to take my entire quilt back and I'm going to wind it onto my take-up rail. Now you notice I'm not spending a whole lot of time smoothing or fluffing my quilt. I am going to get the dust bunnies off.
Didn't have to say that, they weren't there.
All right, and now I'm going to zip my quilt back onto my backing bar. so much faster than pinning. Okay, once I have that zip on, I am simply going to wind my entire quilt onto my backing bar. You'll notice it goes on very smoothly, very straight and even. All right. Once I have my quilt back loaded onto my backing bar, I am going to unzip my top of my backing off of my leader. That was a temporary zip. Because now I have to feed my leader through my idler bar or my tensioner bar so I have tension on my quilt. To do that, I'm going to pull the rail pin, roll the rail so that my hinge pin is to the top. I'm going to pull the hinge pin, crack open that bar. Okay. I'm going to then take my leader on my take-up rail, put it in front of my idler bar. Okay, if you want to come shoot this from the end so they can see all the way down. Okay, so my leader goes from the front up and into that split rail. All the way down. Okay, and then the next motion I make is to bring my zipper to the front. We're going to go around to the front. So it becomes an S. It's front, up and in, around and under. With the leader woven through the idler bar, I will now zip my quilt backing back onto the leader. Fast and easy load. Close my idler bar, engage your hinge pin. Okay, now I need to bring up a little bit of, bless you. Okay, I need to bring up a little bit of my leader so I have some room to pull up some slack. When you are engaging your idler bar so that you have tension on your quilt, because right now you have zero tension on your quilt back. Okay, if you look at the quilt back, there is no tension on it right now. In order to put tension onto your quilt back, a couple of things you need to do. First of all, disengage your backing bar ratchets. This bar needs to roll smoothly with no tension. Make sure that your take-up bar is disengaged also. You do not want this to ratchet. It needs to have a lot of room to move. The third and the most important thing, if you look at where my zipper is on the quilt back, my zipper is almost halfway between the two bars. A little bit closer to the idler bar than the backing bar, but to start with, go about halfway. When you engage the idler bar, it takes up about 9 inches of fabric. It's a huge amount. So this is also when you advance your quilt, you're going to do the same thing, and we will cover advancing your quilt also. So when I'm ready to do this, I'm going to start by pulling my hinge pin, or my, sorry, not my hinge pin, my idler bar pin. I'm going to roll my idler bar to the front, following this arrow, until I hear that pin engage. That loud click locks that rail in place. And if you look at the quilt, look how much of that leader is taken up. So that's how you load your quilt back. That's the biggie, is making sure that you allow yourself enough space to eat up 6 to 8 inches of your quilt. Okay. and knowing how to operate that hinge pin and that tensioner pin. So with that, I'm going to load the rest of my quilt. I'm going to start with, pause for just a second.
Into action.
All right, so now we are going to load the quilt top onto the frame. And there again, we use a zippered system, and so this goes really fast and easy. It is simply a matter of zipping it on and walking it down. All right, now the easy way to get this to load nice and flat and smooth, we take the entire quilt top, and I'm going to step forward and just let it nice and neatly accordion pleat right underneath the rail. Okay, when I wind this on, it's going to lift straight right off the ground. Okay, anytime when you are loading quilts onto the frame, have your ratchets engaged. It's going to let you know that you're turning your quilt in the right direction. Now, you might, on your quilt top, have to come smooth a little bit. Okay? But really, you won't have to do much. And you're going to stop winding it on just about the time the top edge of your quilt leaves the ground. You don't want to wind any more than that. And actually, I'll have to unwind this a little bit. Once I have my quilt top loaded on my back, now I'm going to put my batting on. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use our channel locks around the front left-hand wheel of my machine. Why my left front-hand wheel? Because it's the easiest one for me to get to. It could be your right front-hand wheel. If you really wanted, it could be one of your back wheels, but I'm short, my arms are short. I like it on the left front hand. What that does is it allows me to stitch a nice straight line on my batting, and it gives me a straight line to bring my quilt top up to. So I'm going to start with, then I'm going to do a 1/2 inch baste. Bring up my bobbin thread, and I'm just going to baste right along. All right, once I have, I'm scratching my nose, got busted. Once I have my straight line basted on there, I can take my channel locks off and put them back in their drawer. That was the drawer. We're gonna take the batting and we're gonna tuck it in between and behind my quilt top. And then I'm gonna bring my quilt top up, rest it up here for just a second, release my quilt top rail. Keep going, keep going, keep going.
Don't know how that turned out.
Oh no. Well, if they see up your nose, we'll know.
I definitely will see that.
All right. And I'm bringing my quilt top up to that straight line I stitched. Okay? All right. top in the corner. Move Darren that way. I'm going to tension my quilt back, which is simply drawing up the quilt back top. Let go, lock that rail into place. Tension your quilt top, which is drawing your quilt top up tight. Let go, lock that one into place, and away you go. To check for tension on your quilt, all you're going to do is take your arm, go underneath your quilt, about right up to your elbow, reach down, you should be able to grab your first knuckle. Okay? If it's too loose, bring it up one, bring it up a little bit, check again. You just want to be able to grab your first knuckle. Grabbing your first knuckle is this, not this, and not this. Just to here. If you can grab farther down, tighten it up. If you can only grab your fingernail, loosen it up. If you have long fingernails, adjust accordingly. Base down the sides. Unhook your scissors. And base down the other side. And yes, this one I'm going from top to bottom. You can go either way. Or, that was bottom to top. This is my Day-Glo orange thread. Absolutely love it. All right, once you have your quilt basted on, you can actually quilt. One of the things that I want to show you, don't forget your side clamps. Okay, make sure you put your side clamps on, adjust your side clamps so you have tension on your sides. And now you're actually ready to quilt. So if this was a real quilt, I would say something like, that was good. I have terrible handwriting. All right, so that is quilting your quilt. You've gone through and you've done a lovely job quilting your quilt, and now you are ready to advance the quilt. Now, specifically for our renters, because we use a zippered system, one of the very first things you have to do the first time you advance your quilt is unclamp the side clamps, which I haven't done yet. Okay? The head of the zipper is very, very large, will not fit through this split rail. So the first time you advance the quilt, you have to actually crack open that idler bar to get that zipper head full. So Starting with number 1. We're going to do this by the numbers. 1. Okay, release the ratchet on your quilt top rail. Number 2, release the ratchet on your backing rail. Number 3, release the ratchet on the take-up rail. Number 4, pull the rail pin, roll the quilt all the way around, or roll the idler bar all the way around until you hear that rail pin click in place. Okay? As you start to advance the quilt, you're turning rail number 3, okay, towards the front of the machine. Here is where this is going to get in the way. So reach over, release the hinge pin, okay, holding it open. We're going to advance this quilt through. Okay? That's all we're going to do, just to get that zipper head full. And then I have to re-engage that hinge pin. So grab that hinge pin and lock that in so that rail is already closed up again. Now we can finish advancing the quilt. Okay? If you look on my practice piece, there is a black mark. That black mark represents my last line of stitching. So that is where I finished stitching this pass of this quilt. Okay? In order to advance this and to have a couple of inches of my previous stitching showing, I want to stop with that line, that last little bit of stitching, right almost dead center of the frame. Okay? We're going to engage the idler bar by releasing the idler bar pin and rolling the idler bar to the front of the machine. So that is in a counterclockwise direction. And you can see how that took up almost all of that. If that black mark were my previous line of stitching, I have about 1.5 to 2 inches of my stitching showing, which allows me to quilt back into previous spaces. So, number 4 has been engaged. Engage number 3, engage the ratchet. Number 2, we are going to tension our quilt back, drawing it up tight, letting go. Engage number 2 ratchet, the backing rail ratchet. Number 1, draw your quilt top up nice and tight, let it go. Engage that ratchet. Base down your sides, put on your side clamps, and repeat. So, the next time you advance your quilt, you do not have to open up the hinge pin. All you have to do, so we've quilted this whole section, all you have to do, release, okay, hear that pin pop into place. You need to get 1 and 2 released, so both of your backing rail and your quilt top have been released. Number 3 is released, number 4 is released. Advance your quilt. Just that simple. There's our previous stitch, that little smiley face. That's where I stopped this time. To put tension on the quilt, we're going to release the idler bar pin, roll to the front, hear it click. Engage number 3, tension your back, engage number 2, tension your top, engage number 1 until you're done. So, that is loading your quilt and advancing the quilt all in one go. If you have any questions,
Don't call me.
Darren says don't call him. If you have any questions, call your dealer. That's usually, this is for people who own the machines. Call your dealer first, ask them for help. If your dealer can't help you, because not all the dealers know how to do this machine and how to do this frame, because face it, dealers aren't quilters, they're dealers, okay? So if you have questions, there are resources out there. There is a Yahoo group called Jewels in Motion. A lot of really nice gals on there can answer questions. There is also a Facebook group called Babylock Crown Jewel Owners. I am the admin for that. We have over 200 members, and several of us have this frame. If you want an immediate response, go onto the Facebook group. If you really get into a bind, we are Discount Vac and Sew in Kennewick, Washington. You can look us up in the phone book. Ask for Darren.
Like us on Facebook.